Michel, thank you very much for agreeing to talk with our class. Can you
Hello,
tell
Richard.
us, can you tell us about the background to how Human Info got to be established? And then we can talk about the Medicines Portal.
Okay, so initially I wanted to go with Médecins Sans Frontières or even the Sisters of Mother Teresa to Africa to help people as a doctor. But soon I realized, first of all, I had a technical medical problem that I was allergic to most malaria medication. And I also realized that basically what you need to help people is a lot of knowledge, know-how, best practices, and how to implement them. Because you are going to a village and you find out that the children are malnourished, but basically, for example, this is an agricultural problem or a food distribution problem, or people have a certain disease. Or a number of sanitary problems, and you realize that this has to do with sanitation, with the way the sewerage is collected, etc. So I realized all this know-how was available at the United Nations, but they sold the books at $20 or $30 or $40. So I went to WHO. I said to them, with the help of GTZ, a big German organization, we'll scan your books for free, we put it on a CD of $1, and we send it to all the doctors in developing countries. And that's how it started. In fact, they refused, so it took me 4 to 5 years to convince them to give permissions to digitize those publications. And that's how we also found the digital library software with the professor Ian Whitten in New Zealand. So I went to New Zealand and I told him he had a kind of indexing system which was very powerful. Can we use this for developing countries purposes? He immediately agreed. So we developed the software which would allow us to create CD-ROMs or online collection, but that was not internet was not so developed at that time, without royalty costs. Because the costs had to be free so that the CDs could be copied endlessly by the users. And in fact, the idea behind this is a vaccination concept. If you vaccinate 1 million people against a disease in a country, you don't know which ones will encounter a virus or that particular bacteria. But you have to vaccinate all of them in order to be sure no one will get the disease and will propagate it. And it's a little bit in reverse positive way with information vaccination. We have to provide all the publications to all people so that they can choose, according to the specific situation and the needs they are in, what combination of books or knowledge they are needing to solve that particular problem. And it has to be best practices. They shouldn't reinvent things which are not good. And the organizations, let's say, for developing countries' purposes, who have the best practice information in the world are the United Nations. So that's a little bit the goal of Human Info, to facilitate the distribution of information to as many people as possible in bulk, so that they can choose and recombine the information they need to solve their local needs and problems and challenges. Yeah.
Michel, once you got started, a lot of different organizations got involved. Could you tell us about what happened with them?
Yes. First of all, it took some time, 5 years, to get permission to use the WHO publications, and now, of course, they are my preferred organization and I get along with everyone there. But during those 5 years, on one hand, I realized there was also a cavern of Alibaba, golden nuggets like you will never find them in all kind of other organizations. And through the contacts I managed to work initially with UNESCO and FAO, but at the end I worked with 15 United Nations organizations to digitize the publications. And I did this because I realized solving the poverty and solving the development problems is not unidirectional or unidimensional or unisector problem in developing countries, but it's all interrelated. The food and nutrition situation of the children is related to agriculture, but also to distribution of the food stuff, and also to education. You have to educate people. They have to go to schools or get agriculture extension courses. And then you have the problem of the infrastructure, the small industries, which is UNIDO, the United Nations Organizations for Industrial Development. Then, of course, you have the problem of the slums, and that's UN Habitat. So at the end, we digitized, I think, about 50 to 70,000 publications, and that's about, I think, more than 5 or 6 million pages. And you have to realize that one university degree in Belgium as a medical doctor, which is the heaviest, is 30,000 pages. So getting all this information into a DVD or CD collection empowers the people to help solve the poverty problem. And that was the motivation behind helping all the UN organizations to digitize their publications at low cost, which was their problem, and we solved it with our small NGO, Human Info.
Michel, with all this information available either on DVDs or on the web, how do people make links to bring it all together?
Well, Richard, that's a very nice thing about these libraries, is that in fact they mirror a little bit how the brain is working. And I really would like to motivate your students and give them, let's say, the good news, the message that this is a system which will help them tremendously of remembering and mastering a lot of content, but in a very fun way, because it corresponds to the way the mind is working. The mind remembers not by repetition but by connection. And the more you have connections, different dimensions, different links towards a certain subject, the more passionate you can become about the subject, even if it looks dull at the first sight, and the more you can start to master it and understand the connections and the different networking of this information with other types. And so therefore, if you want to learn something, and you open a book of the, for example, the digital, the portal, the Essential Medicines portal, you could scroll through the PDF file quite rapidly, and then you have to try to find subjects or links or dimensions in another field and open another file, even if you didn't go in detail. But it will arouse your natural curiosity, and you will understand more and more links and how all this information is interconnected to give solutions. And for example, the Essential Medicines portal, with these 4,000 publications, you could ask the question, if I had $300 million in a country with 8 million people, how for medication and essential medicines with vaccination, etc., what should I do? So you could start to think about, maybe I need a list of essential medication, or on the other hand, how to spend the budget, what should my ministry be organized with, how to cope with corruption, how to create distribution chains which are efficient and who meet the needs of the people, how to control how these medication have been used. Should I buy Indian medication? How much it costs? Yes, but is it legal? Is it okay for the patents? And so when you start to ask yourself those broad questions and then try to look into the portal for these solutions, you find out that you get empowered, and you realize that any person with a bit intelligence, but with a lot of knowledge and with a good access of it, can contribute enormously for solving his local problems, but also his country problems. And that's a little bit the goal of this library, to mirror the way the brain is working. And I invite your students to look at this way, to empower themselves and wander around, and at the end they will master the center more than they think was previously possible.
Michel, when you first started working with WHO, you produced a bookshelf, but that evolved very quickly. Can you tell us about the sequence?
Okay, thank you, Richard, for this question. Yes, indeed. In the beginning, as a small NGO, I realized quite rapidly we couldn't finance all this scanning, etc. ourselves. So we proposed the departments of the WHO or from other United Nations organizations to digitize specifically their own publications, because somehow they had more control over this. But then we created the first bookshelf, which was about 200 or 300 publications, each $20. So it was already a gift of $6,000 to doctors. And we also convinced WHO to make it self-copyable, so that with one CD you can copy it on as many PCs as possible. But quite rapidly, we realized these 200 books were not enough and were not representing the complete needs of the users. And therefore, of course, taking into account that whatever gets the stamp of WHO has a kind of validation value towards governments, we had to expand this selection. And therefore, what WHO did together with us, but you were also a big part of this, Richard, we went to the reference centers of WHO, the country offices, and we invited them to submit publications which were not strictly WHO publications, but which were contributing a lot to good information and validated information. And so therefore, the bookshelf expanded from 200 books to 600 books to 700 or 800. And at that moment we realized that we would have to create a portal and that we should expand this even more. And at that moment came MSH, the United States organizations from the United States government, which also had a number of own publications, and who wanted to sponsor the development of an even larger library, the portal, the Essential Medicines portal. And so the goal now of this Essential Medicines portal is to become the global reference and validated publications portal in which anyone involved in any aspect of essential medicines can find the bulk of the gray, white and official publications, who are all of a certain minimum good quality and who are all type of providing basic information or advanced information in the field of essential medicines. And therefore it becomes a tool, because we have expanded this to so many other organizations, a global reference tool for essential medicines with the help of MSH.
Okay. So Michel, how does the portal work?
Okay, Richard. So together with Ian Witten, the professor who developed the Greenstone, we wanted to convey an experience of a kind of helicopter, or what he calls a kitchen of knowledge preparation, where when you want to prepare a kind of dish of knowledge, you are cooking, creating the information, and at the same time the kitchen is turning, the walls of the kitchen is turning towards you, so that at any moment the information you need is within your reach. And this is what we achieved, and I think quite successfully, for the Essential Medicines and Health Products portal, because you can search information by almost 10 different dimensions, and you can also switch between them. For example, you can find a book about a certain subject and then see who is the author and realize, maybe this person has also written other interesting books and or articles or abstracts, and then you search for it and you get all the abstracts that this person wrote. You can also look by region and select information only applicable for that author or in that subject for that particular region. So this is a little bit what we try to achieve with the Medicines bookshelf, is to offer to the brain of the user a tool which allows him to find at any moment information through another dimension, but which is very well thought of in order to meet the needs in this sector. And therefore, if you would compare the portal with Google, which typically only gives, of course it's extremely useful tool, and also Wikipedia is a useful tool, etc. But they typically only give information in one or two specific subjects or fields or keywords, and Google also with a lot of advertisements, whereas here the portal, the user knows that all the information has been validated, is good information, and he can access it from any possible way. Then the question, of course, if I may add, is how can we help the user once he has collected all this information, to retain this information and to work with it in a later stage, or to share it with someone else. And I give exactly the same information again. Suppose you had a budget of $300–400 million, or if you had a problem of 500,000 undernourished children with a lot of diseases, and you have to solve this as a governor or as a head doctor, how should you do this? And we have created a feature called creating sub-collections to allow people to create their own tailored sub-collections out of those 4,000 publications ranging from 5 to 10 to 20 to 50 to solve a certain number of local problems. And this is a feature which we think is very interesting, and which of course, Richard, you will invite your students to create one of those sub-collections with the portal.
Good. Thank you very much, Michel. That's very clear. But can you tell us a little bit more about your vision for the future? Because I think this is still and will always be a work in progress.
Yes, Richard. First of all, Human Info and myself, we are dedicating for development and poverty reduction in a broad sense. So this means that the technology will always be adapted to a system which is free, because per definition people or developing countries have not the means to pay this, and also accessible by as many people as possible. Now, one small drawback of the recent evolution of having everything in PDF files is that the granularity of the information is not optimal. Initially, 10 years ago, we digitized about 1,500 books to create, and it's one of the libraries you will see there. It's in fact the Human Info Library for Sustainable Development, the Community Development Library, where we added 1,200 publications in all kinds of fields, but they were transformed in HTML. And when you do a search at that level of HTML, in fact, the granularity is on the level of the paragraph or even of the sentences. And then you get a lot of hits with the sentences, whereas on Google and also in the portal, now when you have hits, you have it on the PDF level. So I hope at a certain moment, if we have some resources, that we can redigitize and reformat the publications in XML format, because then it's much easier to use them on cell phones and on other machine systems that will be developed. As you know, the cell phone is expanding and is used by the hundreds of millions of Africans and Asian people, but of course the format is not suited for reading PDF files. So that's one thing we would like to do. The second, of course, is the problem of the bandwidth to developing countries. We want to empower people, but just people who need 50 or 100 PDF files, it's easily 30, 50, 100 gigabytes. Well, megabyte or so I think the average is 3 megabytes. So let's say 300 megabytes. But this can be very costly for people in developing countries. So one idea we have is to create mirror sites in local universities. And this means we have to create special software so that the mirror sites are always updated with the latest information. And then we would also, in fact, like to have a push technology. This means that if we have a critical mass of students or researchers who are coming up with a very interesting solution, and we identify through the portal who are the key people in a country who are in fact confronted with this problem, we could recompile a small library for them, or even an abstract of all these abstracts and libraries, and push the information to them, citing the original source. This means the portal and maybe some other portals. So this means that instead of being a passive instrument, we will push specifically certain types of information. And just to give one example, it was the influenza. We also created the influenza training library for the influenza department of WHO, but now we have the Ebola epidemic. And one of the big problems is training the people for these safety measures and the right equipment, etc. So we can imagine that when such a crisis is unfolding, that we could push towards all those people the basic information, that at least they know, and that all the people on all levels of the decision tree know what is the best practice in this case and what they should anticipate and order, etc. So this is one of the dreams that I have, that we could help very actively, specifically the target groups who need this. And so I would still like to show the CDs we made over the years. We made, we think, about 150 CDs, which on average 200 publications. And initially, of course, it were CDs with a limitation of 600 megabytes. After that, it were DVDs. And now we're evolving towards the portal and maybe also USB sticks. For me, the carrier is not the most important thing. But what I think is also important is the ability to have a copy of the full portal on each PC of relevant users in developing countries. And that's why we will always make the collection portable as a whole, but also, if possible, accessible through mobile devices.
Good. Well, thank you very much indeed, Michel. It's really good to hear from you and to hear about your life's work. Have you any final comments that you'd like to make?
Yes, I think the students should trust their brain and the ability of the brain to create a lot of connections, and they should embrace wandering from place to place in this information portal and expand their horizon, even if at first sight it doesn't look a very productive thing. It will only strengthen them. And I also hope that it will inspire them at looking at problems in developing countries and finding themselves a solution they will offer or make, because at the end the information has to be implemented, and it's their generation and their friends and their contacts who will implement them. So I wish them all the luck and also all the passion that will surely come up if they use tools like this. And I wish to thank you also for all your efforts you have done to make this portal possible. Thank you.